A polished marble foyer greeted guests as they stepped into an upscale hotel known simply as the Grand Meridian. The lobby's gleaming surfaces and modern sculptures had long symbolized luxury and impeccable service. That night, however, the impeccable routine was shattered by a discovery that would send shockwaves through the establishment and the community beyond. During the late hours, when most of the hotel's guests had retired to their rooms and the front desk had gone quiet, a senior concierge named Roberto Delgado was making his usual rounds. With a practiced air born of decades of experience, he navigated the labyrinth of corridors, his mind occupied with the minutiae of room assignments and the day's unresolved guest requests. As he passed by a corridor leading to the executive floors, Roberto noticed an irregularity. A door, always secured after check-in, was slightly ajar. Curious and cautious, he approached the door, its darkened wood contrasting with the ambient glow of the corridor's recessed lighting. Roberto gently pushed the door open and found a scene that defied every expectation of his long career. On the richly carpeted floor lay the body of a man, his expensive suit rumpled and stained with dark patches of what appeared to be blood. The man's eyes, wide open in a final look of uncomprehending terror, were fixed on the ornate ceiling. Clutched tightly in his right hand was a small scrap of paper, its surface marred by smeared ink and torn edges. With a surge of alarm, Roberto fumbled for his radio and whispered, There's been an incident on floor 12. In moments, his call had mobilized a team of uniformed officers and forensic specialists who arrived with deliberate precision, sealing off the area and beginning their investigation. The officers carefully documented every detail in the scene, the exact posture of the body against the plush carpet, the faint impressions left by the man's designer shoes on the patterned rug, and the delicate scrap of paper that lay as if it were his final, desperate message. The evidence was arranged with a chilling precision that suggested nothing was accidental. Each element of the scene was exactly as if it had been orchestrated. Later, identification efforts confirmed that the victim was Martin Ellis, a mid-level manager who had been responsible for coordinating high-profile events and overseeing VIP guest services at the Grand Meridian for over 7 years. Known among his colleagues for his meticulous attention to detail and his commitment to excellence, Martin had earned the respect and admiration of both staff and guests. Privately, however, he had grown increasingly concerned about discrepancies he had uncovered in the hotel's financial and inventory records. Small, almost imperceptible differences that, when taken together, suggested a deliberate misappropriation of funds. Over the past few weeks, he had spent long hours in his office, cross-referencing digital data with paper ledgers and making frantic notes in a leather-bound journal. His last recorded entry had been abruptly cut off, leaving a final sentence incomplete, as if interrupted by an unforeseen event. Detective Alicia Ramirez was assigned to the case, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for unraveling complex puzzles by focusing on the smallest of details. Arriving at the Grand Meridian in the quiet hours, Alicia moved deliberately through the opulent corridors, her eyes scanning every surface, the gleam of polished brass, the soft murmur of distant voices from the front desk, and the subtle echo of her own footsteps on marble. In the executive suite where Martin's body had been found, she knelt beside the fallen man. With gloved fingers, she gently retrieved the scrap of paper from his grasp. The paper, its ink smeared by moisture and its edges frayed, bore a hasty sequence of numbers and letters that might have been a code, a final message left behind in a moment of desperate clarity. Every detail, the way the paper curled slightly at one corner, the faint residue of what might have been a signature, the pattern of nearby fingerprints on the smooth surface of the desk, was painstakingly recorded in her notebook. Instead of immediately imposing a neat timeline on the unfolding events, Detective Ramirez allowed the investigation to expand in layers. Her first step was to speak with those who had interacted with Martin in the days leading up to his death. At the busy front desk, where the constant stream of guests and inquiries had slowed considerably in the late evening, she interviewed Laura Donovan, a seasoned receptionist known for her observant nature. Laura recalled that Martin had appeared unusually preoccupied during his shift. He was always so calm and precise, Laura said softly, her tone weighted with concern. But lately he kept talking about numbers not adding up in the donation logs and about missing inventory in the supplies for our VIP events. I overheard him asking our finance clerk if something was off. I thought he was just double-checking routine details, but now I believe he was onto something much larger. Next, Detective Ramirez sought the recollections of Samir Patel, a night shift security officer who patrolled the private corridors of the executive floors. Samir remembered that just a few nights prior he had seen Martin pacing near the restricted area. He was glancing at his phone and scribbling something in a notebook. Samir recounted, "I overheard him mutter, 'There's a discrepancy here, a gap that shouldn't be there.' He looked more agitated than usual. At the time I thought it was just the pressure of the job, but now it seems like he was chasing a problem that someone would kill to keep hidden." Compelled by these testimonies, Detective Ramirez obtained a warrant to search Martin's modest apartment, a sparse yet orderly space in an old building not far from the hotel. The apartment was simple, a single room with minimal furnishings, a worn couch pushed against a plain wall, a cluttered desk, and a narrow window overlooking a busy urban street. The atmosphere was heavy with the lingering scent of stale coffee and old paper, a quiet testament to a life devoted to precise record-keeping. In a locked drawer of a battered wooden desk, Alicia discovered Martin's personal journal. Its pages were meticulously filled with detailed entries, logs of daily tasks, observations about supply shipments, and annotations on the discrepancies he had noticed. The early entries were routine, but as the days progressed, his tone grew increasingly anxious. In one entry dated 3 days before his death, Martin wrote, "I have discovered persistent discrepancies in our donation and inventory records, small amounts missing from each transaction that, when totaled, are alarmingly significant. I fear that someone with privileged access is deliberately diverting funds for personal gain. If I continue to pursue this, I may expose a secret that those in power will do anything to hide." The entry ended abruptly, as if his pen had been seized mid-sentence, leaving behind a silence that resonated with impending dread. Simultaneously, the cyber unit managed to recover fragments of deleted text messages from Martin's aging cell phone, a device that had seen countless late nights and hurried calls. The recovered messages were stark and unadorned. One message simply read, "Stop now," while another said, "Don't ask questions." Their curt, impersonal tone confirmed that someone had been issuing clear warnings to Martin, a directive that, tragically, he had ignored. Rather than arranging the evidence into a tidy, linear narrative, Detective Ramirez allowed her investigation to branch out organically. With the cooperation of the hotel's management, she turned her attention to the administrative records stored in the secure archive room. This room was a repository of decades of transactions, a chaotic blend of handwritten ledgers, aging computer files, and meticulously organized records of every donation, purchase, and supply order made over the years. Working side by side with Evelyn Torres, a veteran records clerk whose decades-long career had imbued her with an almost intuitive understanding of the system, Alicia meticulously compared the digital logs with the original paper records. The differences were minute, a single digit misprinted here, a date shifted there, but when compiled over several months they revealed a pattern too consistent to be the result of innocent error. The digital records uniformly indicated that every shipment was complete, while the handwritten logs consistently documented minor shortfalls, tiny discrepancies that when summed, amounted to a significant diversion of funds. Forensic accountants were then brought in to analyze the financial data. Their exhaustive examination produced detailed charts and graphs that mapped the cumulative impact of these discrepancies. The numbers were damning. These minor shortfalls, nearly invisible on a day-to-day basis, had over time resulted in the misappropriation of a substantial sum, a sum covertly funneled through a labyrinth of electronic transactions to an offshore account linked to a shell corporation. Every fractional variance, every minute alteration in the records contributed to a broader narrative of deliberate systematic fraud, a network of mid-level administrators exploiting vulnerabilities in both digital and paper-based systems for their own enrichment. As layers of evidence continued to accumulate, Detective Ramirez began receiving anonymous tips. One plain envelope, discovered tucked behind a stack of files in the archive room, contained a typed note that simply stated, "Every figure hides a secret." Another tip, sent via a secure email from an untraceable source, bluntly instructed, "Cease your investigation." Although these messages offered little detail, their tone was unmistakably menacing, a clear indication that those behind the cover-up were closely monitoring her progress. and were prepared to take drastic measures to protect their secret. Federal agents, alerted to the potential scope of the corruption, soon joined the investigation with their state-of-the-art digital forensic tools. They painstakingly reconstructed a near-complete timeline of the deleted text messages from Martin's phone, revealing that the warnings had grown increasingly urgent in the final days before his murder. Concurrently, forensic accountants developed intricate financial models that detailed how the aggregation of minor discrepancies over time resulted in a significant diversion of funds from the hotel's operating budget. The combined evidence formed an inescapable mosaic, a meticulously orchestrated cover-up that had drained resources for years, and when Martin's investigation threatened to expose the truth, his life was brutally cut short. Detective Ramirez compiled all her findings into a comprehensive report, a sprawling dossier exceeding 400 pages that interwove photographs of the silent archive room, scans of pages from Martin's journal, digital reconstructions of the deleted text messages, and detailed financial analyses that traced the diverted funds to their offshore destination. The dossier presented a clear narrative for years. Subtle discrepancies in the hotel's donation and supply records had been deliberately engineered to divert funds into an offshore account. When Martin began to document these irregularities, his inquiry threatened to expose a deep-rooted network of corruption, a network that, in a ruthless bid to preserve its secret, ended his life. The district attorney, troubled by the implications of the evidence for public trust in high-end hospitality, convened a grand jury in a modern courthouse known for its rigorous pursuit of accountability. Over a series of long sessions that stretched late into the night, expert witnesses testified about the digital forensic techniques used to recover the deleted messages, the statistical analyses that proved the discrepancies were too systematic to be mere errors, and the forensic accounting that traced the diverted funds to an offshore account associated with a shell corporation. Their testimonies, delivered with painstaking precision, left little room for doubt. After extensive deliberation, the grand jury returned indictments on multiple charges, including fraud, conspiracy, and accessory to homicide, that directly linked the systematic manipulation of records to the murder of Martin Ellis. The trial unfolded over several weeks in a courtroom that buzzed with a mix of tension and determination. Federal prosecutors laid out their case with clarity, interweaving digital reconstructions of the recovered text messages with comprehensive financial charts that showed how minute discrepancies, when aggregated over time, diverted a significant sum from the hotel's budget. A digital forensics expert meticulously detailed how each curt command, "Stop now, don't ask questions," had been reassembled into a continuous timeline that grew increasingly urgent as the investigation progressed. Forensic accountants presented elaborate graphs, demonstrating that the cumulative effect of minor errors resulted in a financial gap that could only have been caused by deliberate, systematic fraud. Witness after witness described how the integrity of the records had gradually eroded, a process so subtle and insidious that it allowed corruption to become deeply embedded in the institution's operations. When Detective Ramirez took the stand, her tone was measured yet carried the unmistakable weight of personal loss. She described with careful clarity the moment she discovered Martin's body in the quiet corridors of the archive, a moment marked by the steady echo of her footsteps on the smooth floor, the faint imprint of his shoes in a delicate layer of dust, and the fragile scrap of paper that had been his final desperate clue. Her testimony wove together every piece of evidence, from the altered digital logs and handwritten discrepancies to the recovered journal entries and terse text messages, forming an unassailable portrait of systematic corruption. Each observation was delivered with deliberate care, and as her words filled the courtroom, the magnitude of the betrayal became painfully clear. In the end, the grand jury's indictments resulted in the conviction of several mid-level administrators and technical operatives implicated in the fraudulent scheme. They were sentenced to lengthy prison terms, and their names were recorded as stark reminders of the consequences of exploiting institutional trust. Yet among the community, a sense of unresolved injustice lingered. The highest-ranking conspirators, the architects of the diversion, managed to elude full exposure through complex legal defenses, and their identities remained largely obscured. This enduring uncertainty cast a heavy shadow over the proceedings, a constant reminder that even when corruption is unveiled, some secrets persist in the hidden recesses of power. Following the trial, the hotel's leadership was forced to implement sweeping reforms, Under the scrutiny of independent auditors and mounting public pressure, the institution completely overhauled its digital record-keeping systems. New protocols were established to ensure real-time logging of every donation, supply order, and administrative transaction, fortified by robust encryption measures and periodic public audits. Although these measures could not undo the tragic loss of Martin Ellis, they served as a clear pledge to transparency, a commitment that no hidden discrepancy would again compromise the public's trust. Local media outlets, driven by a passion for investigative journalism, produced a series of documentaries and in-depth articles detailing every facet of the case, from the startling discovery in the back office to the painstaking digital reconstructions that exposed a covert network of corruption. Public forums and community meetings were held at various civic centers, where residents, business leaders, and cultural advocates engaged in spirited debates about the ethical responsibilities of data management and the importance of preserving public trust. The story of Martin Ellis, a dedicated manager who had risked everything to uncover the truth, became a rallying cry for accountability, spurring renewed vigilance among local citizens and industry insiders. For Detective Ramirez, every new investigation was approached with the lessons of this case deeply ingrained in her mind. During the quiet moments before the hotel opened each day, in her modest office, illuminated by a single desk lamp and accompanied by the soft hum of her computer, she would revisit the pages of Martin's journal and scrutinize the reconstructed text messages with unwavering focus. Each minor detail, a slight discrepancy in a ledger, a curt message fragment, served as a constant reminder that relentless inquiry is the path to exposing corruption, and that every hidden inconsistency has the potential to unravel an entire network of deceit. As the Grand Meridian resumed its operations, guests returning to its luxurious rooms, events and galas once again enlivening the elegant halls, and the ambient murmur of refined conversations filling every corner, the legacy of the investigation reshaped not only the institution's internal processes but also the broader community's commitment to accountability. The reformed digital systems, once susceptible to subtle manipulation, now stood as beacons of transparency, rigorously audited by independent experts and accessible to any concerned party. Ongoing discussions about ethical data management and the safeguarding of public trust became a cornerstone of local business seminars and cultural forums, ensuring that the hard lessons learned from Martin Ellis's tragic fate would inspire vigilance for years to come. This case, assembled from digital fragments, painstaking financial analyses, and the unwavering determination of an investigator who refused to overlook the smallest clue, was more than the story of a single murder or a series of minor discrepancies. It revealed a labyrinth of modern corruption, a mosaic of hidden errors and deliberate omissions that showed how even the most respected institutions can be subverted from within. The reforms that followed, the increased vigilance among staff, and the community's resolute commitment to scrutinize every record have become a lasting testament to the power of truth. And as the Grand Meridian's automatic doors opened each day to welcome a new wave of guests seeking both luxury and integrity, the memory of Martin Ellis endured, a persistent challenge to question every irregularity, and a reminder that genuine accountability is built one small, revealed detail at a time. Aboard the cruise ship Horizon, a place where luxury and leisure converged on endless blue waters, a hidden tragedy was about to unravel amid the glitter of chandeliers and the hushed rustle of silk. The vessel, a floating palace of entertainment and indulgence, boasted a grand atrium lined with marble columns and vivid murals depicting mythic sea creatures. Lavish restaurants and intimate lounges echoed with laughter and soft music, while private balconies offered panoramic views of the ocean's horizon. Yet beneath this veneer of elegance, a secret had taken root, one that would shatter lives and expose a web of deceit on board. Late one evening, when most passengers had retired to their staterooms and the ship's public areas hummed with a subdued rhythm of closing hours, maintenance supervisor Caleb Ramirez was making his customary rounds through the service corridors. Caleb had been with Horizon for nearly a decade. He knew every passageway, every hidden door behind which the ship's inner workings lay. His job was to ensure that every mechanical system ran flawlessly, but also to safeguard sensitive documents stored in a secure area behind the crew offices. That night, as he navigated the labyrinth of back corridors lit by flickering fluorescent bulbs, he noticed an irregularity, a door labeled Records, that normally remained sealed after curfew was slightly ajar. Caleb's trained eyes narrowed. He approached the door cautiously, his hand hovering over the lock. When he pushed it open, his flashlight cut a narrow beam across a modest room filled with metal filing cabinets, rows of aged computer terminals, and stacks of paper logs. And there, lying on the smooth, scuffed floor, was a body. The man was dressed in a sharply tailored suit that now hung in disarray. His eyes stared blankly upward, and his expression was fixed in a silent scream of shock. In his right hand, as though clutched in a final attempt at communication, lay a small scrap of paper. The paper's ink had run in dark smears, forming an indecipherable sequence of numbers and letters that offered no immediate clarity. Caleb's heart pounded as he fumbled for his radio. "I found a body in the records room," he managed, his voice trembling as he backed away, leaving the scene to the arriving authorities. Within minutes, the corridor filled with the sound of uniformed officers and forensic specialists. Clad in dark coveralls and moving with deliberate precision, the team cordoned off the room. They photographed every detail: the exact position of the body on the tiled floor, the faint impressions of designer shoes in a thin layer of moisture, and the fragile scrap of paper clutched in the victim's stiff fingers. The careful staging suggested that nothing was random, that every element had been arranged with deliberate purpose. Later that night, investigators confirmed the identity of the victim as Malcolm Pierce, a mid-level operations manager responsible for overseeing both the ship's logistical schedules and financial records. Colleagues described Malcolm as meticulous, a man whose unwavering dedication to precision had earned him quiet admiration among the crew. Yet in recent weeks, Malcolm had grown increasingly preoccupied. In hushed moments shared with trusted colleagues, he had confided his growing concerns about discrepancies in the ship's donation records for sponsored events and in the inventory logs for high-value equipment. Although the differences were minor individually, Malcolm's careful analysis suggested they were not mere errors. They were deliberate manipulations designed to siphon off funds meant for essential upgrades. No one could have foreseen that Malcolm's determined pursuit of these anomalies would provoke the forces protecting a secret hidden deep within Horizon's operations. On that fateful night, as the ambient glow of public spaces gave way to the stark fluorescence of the administrative wing, Malcolm's final hours were unfolding quietly and fatally. Detective Kendra Bishop, an investigator known for her keen insight and willingness to follow even the faintest trail of evidence, was assigned to the case. Arriving at the ship amid the low murmur of late-night activity and the distant sound of waves gently lapping against the hull, Kendra did not rush to secure a narrative. Instead, she moved methodically through the corridors of the administrative area, her eyes taking in every detail: the smooth, worn surface of the tiled floor, the interplay of harsh fluorescent light and shadow cast by filing cabinets, and the soft, persistent hum of machinery in the background. In the cramped records room where Malcolm's body had been discovered, Kendra knelt down and carefully retrieved the damp scrap of paper from his hand. Its hurried, almost desperate scrawl was barely legible, and she suspected that it might be a final clue, a cryptic message left by a man who had been on the verge of exposing a dangerous secret. With gloved fingers, she placed the paper into an evidence bag and began noting every nuance in her notebook, confident that even the smallest irregularity could unlock a far wider conspiracy. Rather than forcing the investigation into a neat, linear account, Detective Bishop allowed it to unfold in layers, gathering fragmented testimonies and scattered clues like pieces of a vast puzzle. Her first step was to interview those who had been present on board in the days preceding the tragedy. In the quiet ambiance of a dimly lit staff lounge off the main atrium, she met with Celia Hammond, a longtime administrative assistant who had worked closely with Malcolm. Celia recalled that over the past week, Malcolm had been unusually tense. He was always so detail-oriented, Celia said softly, her eyes distant. But lately he spent hours double-checking the donation records and the equipment inventories. I heard him mention that something was off, small sums missing here and there, discrepancies that didn't make sense. He seemed almost haunted by it, like he knew he was uncovering something big. Celia's recollections suggested that Malcolm's investigation had uncovered irregularities that went far beyond simple oversight. Next, Kendra spoke with Raul Martinez, a security officer whose routine patrols often brought him near the administrative offices. Raul remembered seeing Malcolm on multiple occasions, quietly reviewing documents and appearing increasingly agitated. "I noticed him several nights before," Raul said in a low voice. "He would check his phone and then rush off toward the records room, looking over his shoulder as if expecting someone to follow him. I asked if everything was all right once, and he just gave a brief nod before disappearing. In hindsight, it seems like he was trying to piece together a puzzle that others didn't want solved." Raul's account lent further weight to the notion that Malcolm's careful inquiries had made him a target. Haunted by these accounts, Detective Bishop obtained a warrant to search Malcolm's modest stateroom, a sparsely furnished cabin in a quiet section of the ship. The stateroom was functional and unadorned, a single bed with plain linens, a small desk, cluttered with documents and personal mementos, and a narrow window offering a view of the harbor's lights. The space carried a faint aroma of disinfectant mixed with a hint of stale coffee, a quiet archive of a life spent in diligent pursuit of order. In a locked compartment of the desk, Kendra discovered Malcolm's personal journal, a worn leather-bound notebook filled with meticulous entries, documenting his daily tasks, his observations, and his growing unease over the discrepancies he had uncovered. The early pages detailed routine procedures and lists of scheduled tasks, but as the days progressed, his writing took on a more anxious tone. In an entry dated 3 days before his death, he wrote, "I have uncovered persistent discrepancies in our donation and inventory records, small amounts missing from every transaction that add up to something significant. I fear that someone with privileged access is diverting funds for their own gain. If I continue to investigate, I may expose a secret that powerful people will kill to keep hidden." The entry ended abruptly, as though his pen had been yanked away mid-sentence, leaving behind an echo of unspoken terror. At the same time, the cyber unit managed to recover fragments of deleted text messages from Malcolm's aging cell phone, a device scarred by countless late-night calls and hurried investigations. The recovered messages were sparse and unembellished. One read simply, "Stop now," while another stated, "Don't ask questions." Their brevity and stark tone confirmed what Kendra had long suspected. Someone had been issuing explicit warnings to halt his inquiry, and those warnings had come too late. Rather than forcing the evidence into a single neat narrative, Detective Bishop allowed her investigation to branch out like a sprawling network. With cooperation from the casino's board of directors, she turned her attention to the administrative records stored in a secure archive room deep within the ship's inner workings. The room was a dense repository of data, stacks of handwritten ledgers, old digital logs, and filing cabinets that had recorded decades of transactions and donations. Working alongside Anthony Cross, a seasoned clerk who had served on the ship for nearly 20 years, Kendra painstakingly compared the digital records with the original paper logs. The differences were minute, a single digit altered here, a date modified there, but when these minor discrepancies were aggregated over several months, they revealed a pattern that was too consistent to be dismissed as a mere accident. The digital logs uniformly indicated that every donation and shipment was complete, whereas the handwritten records consistently documented slight shortfalls, tiny amounts missing from each entry that, when totaled, amounted to a significant diversion of funds and expensive equipment. Forensic accountants were brought in to examine the financial data. Their comprehensive analysis produced detailed charts and graphs that illustrated the cumulative impact of the discrepancies. The numbers were damning. These minor shortfalls, trivial on any individual day, had over time resulted in the misappropriation of a substantial sum, a sum that had been covertly funneled through a complex series of electronic transfers to an offshore account associated with a shell corporation. Every fractional variance contributed to a broader narrative of deliberate, systematic fraud, a network of mid-level administrators who had exploited vulnerabilities in both digital and paper-based record-keeping systems for their own gain. As layers of evidence continued to accumulate, Detective Bishop began receiving anonymous tips. A plain envelope, discovered behind a filing cabinet in the archive, contained a typed note that read, "Every number hides a secret." Another tip, sent via a secure email from an untraceable address, urged her to cease your investigation immediately. Although the messages were brief, Their tone was unmistakably threatening, a clear indication that those responsible were monitoring her every move and prepared to take drastic measures if their scheme was threatened. Federal agents, alerted to the mounting evidence and potential scope of the corruption, joined the investigation with their state-of-the-art digital forensic tools. They painstakingly reconstructed a near-complete timeline of the deleted text messages from Malcolm's phone, revealing that the warnings had grown increasingly urgent in the final days before his murder. Concurrently, forensic accountants developed intricate models that detailed how the aggregation of minor discrepancies over time resulted in a significant diversion of funds from the ship's operating budget. The combined evidence formed an inescapable mosaic, a meticulously orchestrated cover-up that had drained resources for years, and when Malcolm's investigation threatened to expose the truth, his life was brutally cut short. Detective Bishop compiled all her findings into an extensive report, a sprawling dossier of over 400 pages interwoven with photographs of the empty archive room, scans of pages from Malcolm's journal, digital reconstructions of the deleted text messages, and detailed financial analyses that traced the misappropriated funds to an offshore destination. The dossier presented a clear narrative. For years, subtle discrepancies in the museum's donation and supply records had been deliberately engineered to divert funds into an offshore account. When Malcolm began to document these irregularities, his inquiry threatened to expose a deep-seated network of corruption, a network that, in a ruthless bid to protect its secret, ended his life. During the ensuing trial, which spanned several weeks in a packed courtroom filled with ship employees, local residents, legal scholars, and media representatives, federal prosecutors laid out their case with unwavering clarity. They interwove digital reconstructions of the recovered text messages with detailed financial charts that demonstrated how minute discrepancies, when aggregated over time, diverted a significant sum of money from the ship's operational funds. A digital forensics expert took the stand and meticulously explained how each curt command, "Stop now, don't ask questions," had been reassembled into a continuous timeline that escalated as the investigation advanced. Forensic accountants unveiled complex graphs showing how the cumulative effect of minor errors created a financial gap that could only be explained by deliberate, systematic fraud. Multiple witnesses testified about how the integrity of the records had gradually eroded, a subtle process that allowed corruption to nest within a system once revered for its reliability. When Detective Bishop took the stand, her testimony was both calm and resolute. She recounted with careful precision the moment she discovered Malcolm's body in the quiet confines of the records room, the cool, hard surface beneath her, the faint impression of his shoes in a thin film of residue, and the delicate scrap of paper that had been his final, desperate clue. Her narrative seamlessly connected every piece of evidence, from the altered digital logs and handwritten discrepancies to the recovered journal entries and terse text messages, crafting an unassailable portrait of deliberate, systematic corruption. Each observation was delivered with measured care, leaving the courtroom silent as the gravity of the betrayal sank in. In the end, the grand jury's indictments resulted in the conviction of several mid-level administrators and technical operatives implicated in the fraudulent scheme. They received lengthy prison sentences, and their names were recorded in public records as warnings against the abuse of institutional trust. However, many in the community felt that full accountability had not been achieved. The highest-ranking conspirators, the masterminds behind the diversion, managed to shield themselves through complex legal maneuvers, and their identities remained largely obscured. This lingering uncertainty cast a heavy shadow over the case, serving as a reminder that even when corruption is exposed, some secrets persist in the hidden recesses of power. In the months that followed, the cruise ship's management initiated sweeping reforms, under the watchful eye of independent auditors, and amid a surge of public scrutiny, the institution completely overhauled its digital record-keeping systems. New procedures were implemented that required real-time logging of every donation, every supply order, and every administrative decision, fortified by robust encryption and subject to regular public audits. Although these changes could not restore the life lost, they stood as a testament to the ship's commitment to transparency, a pledge that no hidden discrepancy would again undermine public trust. Local media outlets, fueled by a dedication to investigative journalism, produced a series of documentaries and detailed articles chronicling every aspect of the case, From the discovery in the secluded records room to the painstaking digital reconstructions that unmasked a covert network of corruption. Community forums and town hall meetings soon emerged at local civic centers, where residents, business leaders, and legal experts engaged in spirited discussions about the ethical responsibilities of data management and the importance of safeguarding public trust in cultural institutions. The story of Malcolm Pierce, a man whose meticulous pursuit of truth cost him his life, became a rallying cry for accountability, spurring renewed vigilance among community members to scrutinize every record and confront every hidden irregularity. For Detective Bishop, every new investigation was approached with the hard-earned lessons of this case firmly in mind. In quiet moments before the ship's public areas opened each morning, in her modest workspace illuminated by a solitary desk lamp and the soft hum of her computer, she frequently revisited the pages of Malcolm's journal and the reconstructed text messages with unwavering focus. Each minor detail, a marginal change in a ledger, a curt command from a deleted message, served as a reminder that only through relentless inquiry can the truth emerge from the shadows of corruption. As Horizon resumed its daily operations, with passengers disembarking for day trips, staff meticulously managing every detail of onboard services, and the ambient rhythm of life at sea filling every corridor, the legacy of the investigation reshaped not only the ship's internal processes but also the broader community's commitment to accountability. The reformed digital systems, once vulnerable to subtle manipulation, now stood as models of transparency, rigorously audited by independent experts and open to public inspection. Ongoing dialogues about ethical data management and the preservation of institutional integrity became a fixture at industry conferences and community seminars, ensuring that the lessons gleaned from Malcolm's tragic fate would inspire vigilance for years to come. This case, assembled from digital fragments, painstaking financial analyses, and the tireless determination of an investigator who refused to overlook even the smallest clue, went far beyond a mere recounting of a single murder. It revealed an intricate web of modern corruption, a tapestry of hidden discrepancies and deliberate omissions that demonstrated how even the most esteemed institutions can be undermined from within. The reforms that followed, the increased alertness among staff, and the community's shared resolve to scrutinize every record became a lasting testament to the transformative power of truth. As the cruise ship Horizon continued to set sail each day on journeys into the vast, unpredictable ocean, the memory of Malcolm Pierce remained, a quiet call to challenge every inconsistency and to ensure that integrity remains the guiding principle of every institution. In the sprawling glass and steel headquarters of a rising tech startup, conversations buzzed in modern open-plan workspaces and ideas sparked around sleek, minimalist tables. The building itself was a testament to innovation, with walls of glass framing panoramic views of the city and digital displays streaming company metrics in real time. Within this dynamic environment, an unexpected tragedy would soon force everyone to confront the dark side of ambition. Eric Lowry, a mid-level operations supervisor, known for his methodical attention to detail and passion for streamlining workflows, had become increasingly fixated on subtle anomalies in the company's internal data logs. Over the past few weeks, he had noticed minor discrepancies between the numbers reported by the automated system and those manually entered into archived spreadsheets. What initially appeared to be trivial errors soon evolved into a pattern that troubled him deeply. Late into the evenings, when the buzz of office chatter had subsided and most employees had left, Eric would remain at his workstation poring over rows of data, cross-referencing figures and jotting notes in a small leather-bound journal. His growing obsession with these inconsistencies had not gone unnoticed. Few knew that he had confided in a trusted colleague about his concerns regarding manipulated records and the possibility of internal corruption. On a seemingly ordinary night, as the office began to empty and the hum of computers continued uninterrupted, Eric decided to work late once again. At approximately 10:47 p.m., while he was deep in thought examining a particular anomaly that defied his expectations, an unexpected power surge briefly flickered the screens before the room fell into darkness. When the emergency lights came on, the last thing anyone expected was to find him slumped over his desk, lifeless, his body motionless in the glow of a solitary desk lamp. Clutched in his right hand was a crumpled scrap of paper, its surface stained and the hurried sequence of numbers and letters barely decipherable. A final note, perhaps a warning, left behind in the last moments of his investigation. Within minutes, a security officer on a routine patrol discovered Eric's body in the deserted corridor outside his office. His trembling report set off a cascade of emergency responses. Forensic specialists, clad in dark coveralls, arrived and began documenting the scene with clinical precision. They recorded the exact position of Eric's body, the slight smear of coffee on his desk, and even the faint trace of his shoes on the carpet as he had collapsed. Every detail was meticulously noted, hinting at the deliberate nature of what had transpired in the usually unremarkable quiet of the operations floor. The victim was identified as Eric Lowry, a man whose dedication to uncovering discrepancies and ensuring the integrity of data had earned him a reputation for reliability. Among his peers, he was regarded as a quiet guardian of truth, a person who would not let even the smallest error slide. In recent days, however, his fixation on what he believed to be deliberate manipulation of internal records had set him on a collision course with powerful forces within the company. Rumors had begun to circulate that certain high-ranking executives might be benefiting from the misreported figures, diverting funds intended for research and development into secret accounts. Only a handful of trusted colleagues had been aware of Eric's private investigation, and now, his untimely death raised unsettling questions about how far someone was willing to go to keep their misdeeds hidden. Detective Nina Alvarez, a seasoned investigator known for her unconventional methods and relentless pursuit of truth, was assigned to the case. She arrived at the headquarters amid an atmosphere of hushed whispers and grim uncertainty, rather than immediately forcing the scene into a rigid timeline. Nina spent time absorbing every nuance of the environment, the quiet hum of computers in the empty office, the faint smell of burnt electronics from the recent surge, and the eerie stillness in hallways usually filled with late-night keystrokes. In the area where Eric had been found, she carefully examined every piece of evidence. With gloved hands, she retrieved the scrap of paper from his stiff fingers. Though the characters were blurred and smudged, Nina suspected that it was more than a random note. It was a deliberate final message, perhaps a desperate attempt to document what he had uncovered. Instead of forcing a neat linear narrative on the unfolding mystery, Nina allowed the investigation to branch out organically. Her first step was to collect testimonies from those who had been in the building in the days leading up to the incident. At a quiet coffee station near the common area, she interviewed Jasmine Moore, a junior analyst who had worked closely with Eric on several projects. Jasmine recalled that Eric had grown increasingly anxious over the past 2 weeks. He was always precise about his work, she said softly, stirring her lukewarm coffee. But lately he seemed haunted by something. I remember him saying, "The numbers are off, something isn't right here," and then he'd go quiet, almost as if he was afraid to say more. I didn't know what to make of it at the time, but now I fear he uncovered something serious. Jasmine's measured recollection added a layer of personal concern to the investigation, suggesting that Eric's discoveries might have had far-reaching implications. Next, Nina spoke with Oliver Chen, an IT support technician who had noticed Eric's prolonged stays in the office and his frequent reference to certain system logs. Oliver recalled, "Eric was always meticulous, but I noticed he'd been pulling up old data files late at night, files that I hadn't seen in months. He seemed to be comparing them to the current system outputs, and I overheard him mention something about data tampering and hidden discrepancies. I thought he was just being paranoid, but now it looks like he might have been onto something." Oliver's account reinforced the notion that Eric's investigation was uncovering deliberate manipulation, a secret that someone had gone to great lengths to suppress. Haunted by these testimonies, Detective Alvarez obtained a warrant to search Eric Lowry's modest apartment, located in a nondescript building near the tech hub of the city. The apartment was simple, one small room furnished with a functional bed, a desk cluttered with printed spreadsheets and old receipts, and a narrow window that offered a view of a busy urban street. The interior was permeated with the faint aroma of stale coffee and the must of old paper, a quiet reflection of a life devoted to precision. In a locked drawer of a battered desk, Nina discovered Eric's personal journal. The pages filled with neat, deliberate handwriting began with routine entries, logs of his work shifts, notes on equipment deliveries, and mundane observations about daily operations. However, as the entries progressed over the past week, a tone of mounting anxiety emerged. In one entry, written just 3 days before his death, Eric noted, "I have uncovered persistent discrepancies in our operational logs. Small amounts missing from every record that, when totaled, are alarmingly significant. I fear that these errors are not accidental but a deliberate diversion of funds. I must tread carefully. If I continue, I might expose a secret that those in power will kill to protect." The entry ended abruptly, as if his pen had been snatched away mid-sentence, leaving behind a silence filled with foreboding. At the same time, the cyber unit managed to recover fragments of deleted text messages from Eric's aging cell phone, a device marked by a cracked screen and keys worn smooth by countless hours of use. The recovered messages were stark and unembellished. One message simply stated, "Stop now," while another warned, "Don't ask questions." Their curt tone left no room for misinterpretation. These were clear warnings issued by an unknown source, and they confirmed that Eric had been warned off before he could expose the truth. Rather than assembling the evidence into a tidy chronological narrative, Detective Alvarez allowed her investigation to unfold like a complex puzzle. With the cooperation of the company's management, she turned her attention to the administrative records stored in a secure server room deep within the building. The room was a nerve center of activity, a labyrinth of digital files, printed logs, and archived reports documenting every transaction and operational update over the years. Working closely with a veteran records clerk named Kenneth Wu, whose decades of experience had given him an almost instinctive familiarity with the system, Nina meticulously compared the digital logs with the older, manually maintained records. The discrepancies were minute, a single digit off here, a date modified there, but when aggregated over a span of several months, they revealed a pattern that was too systematic to be mere chance. The digital system consistently recorded that every shipment and update was complete, while the older records documented recurring shortfalls, tiny amounts missing from each entry that, when combined, amounted to a significant diversion of resources. Forensic accountants were then brought in to analyze the financial data. Their exhaustive analysis produced detailed charts and graphs that illustrated the cumulative impact of the discrepancies. The figures were damning. What appeared as negligible shortfalls on any given day had over time resulted in the misappropriation of a substantial sum, a sum that had been covertly transferred through a series of electronic transactions to an offshore account associated with a shell corporation. Every fractional variance contributed to a broader narrative of deliberate systematic fraud, a network of mid-level administrators who had exploited vulnerabilities in both digital and manual record-keeping for personal gain. As layers of evidence continued to accumulate, Detective Alvarez began receiving anonymous tips. In one instance, a plain envelope was discovered tucked away behind a row of file cabinets in the server room. Inside, a typed note read, "Every figure hides a secret." In another instance, a secure email arrived from an untraceable source with the simple directive, "Cease your investigation." Although these messages provided few specifics, their tone was unmistakably menacing, a clear indication that those responsible were monitoring her progress and prepared to take drastic measures to preserve their illicit operations. Federal agents alerted to the potential magnitude of the corruption soon joined the investigation armed with state-of-the-art digital forensic tools. They painstakingly reconstructed a nearly complete timeline of the deleted text messages from Eric's phone, revealing that the warnings had become increasingly frequent and urgent in the final days before his murder. Concurrently, forensic accountants developed intricate models that detailed how the aggregation of minor discrepancies over time resulted in a significant diversion of funds from the company's operations. The combined evidence formed a damning mosaic, a meticulously orchestrated cover-up that had drained resources for years, and when Eric's investigation threatened to expose the truth, his life was extinguished in a calculated act. Detective Alvarez compiled all her findings into an extensive report, a sprawling dossier of more than 400 pages interwoven with photographs of the server room's sterile corridors, scans of pages from Eric's journal, digital reconstructions of the deleted text messages, and detailed financial analyses that traced the diverted funds to their offshore destination. The dossier presented a coherent narrative. For years, subtle discrepancies in the company's operational records had been deliberately engineered to divert funds into an offshore account. When Eric began to document these irregularities, his inquiry threatened to expose a deep-seated network of corruption, a network that, in a ruthless bid to protect its secret, ended his life. The district attorney, troubled by the evidence and its implications for public trust in corporate governance, convened a grand jury in a modern courthouse known for its unwavering commitment to accountability. Over several lengthy sessions that stretched into the late hours, expert witnesses testified about the digital forensic techniques that recovered the deleted messages, the statistical analyses that demonstrated the improbability of the discrepancies being random, and the forensic accounting that traced the misappropriated funds to an offshore account linked to a shell corporation. Their testimonies, delivered with precise technical detail, left little room for doubt. After extensive deliberation, the grand jury returned indictments on multiple charges, including fraud, conspiracy, and accessory to homicide, that directly linked the systematic manipulation of records to the murder of Eric Lowry. The trial unfolded over several weeks in a bustling courtroom filled with corporate employees, local residents, legal scholars, and an array of investigative journalists. Federal prosecutors presented their case with clear, methodical explanations, interweaving digital reconstructions of the recovered text messages with detailed financial charts that illustrated how minor discrepancies, when aggregated over time, diverted a substantial sum from the company's operations. A digital forensics expert took the stand and painstakingly described how each brief command, "Stop now, don't ask questions," had been reassembled into a continuous timeline that grew increasingly urgent as the investigation progressed. Forensic accountants unveiled intricate graphs that demonstrated how the cumulative effect of minor errors resulted in a financial gap that could only be explained by deliberate, systematic fraud. Multiple witnesses testified about the gradual erosion of record integrity, a slow, almost imperceptible process that allowed corruption to infiltrate a system once revered for its precision. When Detective Alvarez finally testified, her tone was measured yet imbued with personal grief. She recounted with careful clarity the moment she discovered Eric's body in the silent corridors of the server room, the cold, unyielding floor beneath her, the faint traces of his footsteps on a thin film of dust, and the fragile scrap of paper clutched in his hand that had served as his final cryptic clue. Her testimony intertwined every fragment of evidence, from the altered digital logs and handwritten discrepancies to the recovered journal entries, and the stern, abbreviated text messages, painting a picture of deliberate, systematic corruption that left the courtroom in a reflective stillness. Ultimately, the grand jury's indictments led to the conviction of several mid-level administrators and technical operatives implicated in the fraudulent scheme. They received lengthy prison sentences, and their names were recorded in public records as stark reminders of the consequences of abusing institutional trust. Yet many in the community felt that true accountability remained elusive, as the highest-ranking conspirators, the architects behind the diversion, managed to avoid full exposure through intricate legal defenses, their identities remaining largely concealed. That unresolved ambiguity lingered as a sobering reminder that even when corruption is brought to light, some secrets persist in the hidden corridors of power. Following the trial, the tech company's leadership was forced to implement sweeping reforms. Under the scrutiny of independent auditors and amid intense public pressure, the organization completely overhauled its digital record-keeping systems. New protocols were adopted that mandated real-time logging of every operational update and transaction, fortified by robust encryption measures and subject to regular public audits. Although these changes could never restore the life lost, they stood as a powerful testament to the company's renewed commitment to transparency, a pledge that no hidden discrepancy would again undermine trust. Local media outlets, driven by an unwavering dedication to investigative reporting, produced a series of comprehensive documentaries and in-depth articles that meticulously chronicled every aspect of the case, from the initial discovery in the quiet server room to the painstaking digital reconstructions that revealed a covert network of corruption. Community meetings and town halls soon emerged in local centers, where residents, business leaders, and academic experts engaged in spirited debates about the ethical responsibilities of digital data management and the importance of protecting public trust. The story of Eric Lowry, a dedicated operations supervisor whose unwavering quest for truth cost him his life, became a rallying cry for accountability, inspiring renewed vigilance among stakeholders and consumers alike. For Detective Alvarez, every subsequent investigation was approached with the hard-earned lessons of this case firmly in mind. During the quiet moments before the company reopened its bustling offices each day, in her modest workspace illuminated by a solitary desk lamp and the soft hum of her computer, she frequently revisited the pages of Eric's journal and re-examined the reconstructed text messages with meticulous focus. Each tiny detail, a marginal change in a ledger, a curt directive from a deleted message, served as a steadfast reminder that only persistent inquiry can uncover the full extent of corruption, and that even the smallest inconsistency can unravel a vast network of deceit. As the tech company gradually resumed its daily operations, employees collaborating in open-plan offices, innovative projects moving forward, and the steady pulse of progress echoing through glass corridors, the legacy of the investigation reshaped not only the organization's internal processes, but also the broader community's commitment to accountability. The reformed digital systems, once vulnerable to subtle manipulation, now stood as exemplars of transparency, rigorously audited by independent experts and available for public review. Ongoing discussions about ethical data management and the preservation of institutional integrity became regular features at local forums and academic seminars, ensuring that the lessons gleaned from Eric Lowry's tragic fate would continue to inspire vigilance for years to come. This case, assembled from digital fragments, detailed financial analyses, and the relentless determination of an investigator who refused to overlook even the smallest clue, transcended the mere narrative of a single murder. It exposed an intricate web of modern corruption, a tapestry of hidden errors and deliberate omissions that revealed how even the most cutting-edge institutions could be compromised from within. The sweeping reforms that followed, the increased vigilance among staff, and the community's shared resolve to scrutinize every record became an enduring reminder that truth is found not in grand gestures but in the careful examination of every detail. And as the company's glass doors swung open each morning to welcome a new wave of innovators and dreamers, the memory of Eric Lowry persisted, a persistent call to challenge every irregularity and to champion transparency as the cornerstone of progress. A neon sign buzzed quietly above a dilapidated warehouse in the industrial district, its faded letters barely legible under the harsh glare of the overhead street lamp. The building, once a hive of manufacturing and commerce, now served as a relic of a bygone era. Its cavernous interior, filled with rows of rusting machinery and scattered debris, held whispers of the past, and as it would soon become clear, the dark secrets of the present. Darius Powell had worked at the warehouse for nearly a decade, first as a night watchman and later as a maintenance supervisor. He knew every creaking beam and every shadow cast by the broken windows. His routine was a series of measured steps and careful observations, a nightly vigil over a place that had long been abandoned by its former owners, but repurposed by squatters and petty thieves. On one fateful night, as Darius navigated the narrow corridors between stacks of discarded metal parts and old crates, he noticed something off near a storage room labeled logistics. The door was ajar, a detail that set his instincts on edge. With deliberate caution, Darius pushed the door open. The narrow space inside was lit only by the intermittent flicker of a solitary fluorescent bulb, revealing rows of filing cabinets and a single metal desk covered in dust. There, lying slumped over the cold concrete floor, was the body of a man. His suit, once crisp and refined, was disheveled and stained with dark patches. The victim's face was frozen in an expression of raw terror, his eyes wide and unseeing, as if he had witnessed something unbearable in his final moments. Clutched tightly in his right hand was a scrap of paper. Its edges were torn, and the hastily scrawled sequence of numbers and letters was smeared by moisture, a final clue left behind in a state of desperate urgency. Darius's heart pounded as he fumbled for his radio, barely able to speak through a trembling voice. There's been an incident in logistics. Within minutes, the silence of the warehouse was shattered by the sound of approaching sirens and the measured steps of uniformed officers. Forensic specialists in dark coveralls entered the scene with methodical precision, their cameras flashing as they documented every detail. The exact angle of the body, the faint impression left by the victim's polished shoes on the concrete, and the small scrap of paper still clutched in his stiff fingers. Every element of the scene hinted at deliberate staging, a calculated effort to both obscure the truth and leave behind a message that no one yet understood. Investigators later identified the victim as Leonard "Lenny" Carter, a mid-level operations manager employed by the company that had once run the warehouse. Lenny was known among his colleagues for his meticulous nature and his unwavering dedication to maintaining accurate records. He had risen through the ranks because he could be trusted with the company's most sensitive data, and his attention to detail was legendary. In recent weeks, however, those close to him had noted a change. Lenny had become increasingly withdrawn, often staying late in the office to review discrepancies in the shipment logs and inventory records. Rumors circulated that he had discovered irregularities, small, seemingly insignificant errors that, when aggregated, pointed to a deliberate manipulation of the company's funds. No one knew how far Lenny had delved into this mystery, but it was clear that he was on the verge of exposing something that powerful people were desperate to keep hidden. Detective Talia Monroe was assigned to the case. With a reputation for unconventional methods and an uncanny ability to notice the smallest details, Talia arrived at the warehouse without fanfare, her steps measured and her eyes alert. Rather than immediately racing to construct a timeline of events, she spent time absorbing the environment. The low hum of an aging air conditioner, the soft echo of her footsteps on the cold concrete, the distant sound of dripping water from a leaky pipe. In the shadowed space of the records room, Talia knelt beside Lenny's body and carefully retrieved the scrap of paper from his grasp. The paper's ink was blurred, the hurried message nearly indecipherable, but she sensed it was a desperate attempt to communicate a final clue, a clue that might unlock the truth behind Lenny's death. Every nuance, the position of his body, the faint smudges on the paper, the subtle trail of footprints leading toward the exit, was meticulously recorded in her notebook. Rather than forcing a single narrative, Talia allowed her investigation to branch out in layers. Her first step was to collect statements from those who had been present in the warehouse during the preceding days. In the cramped break room near the loading dock, she met with Simone Richards, an administrative assistant who had worked there for years. Simone recalled that Lenny had seemed unusually preoccupied in recent weeks. He would come into the break room with these long, furrowed looks on his face. Simone said softly, glancing down as if the memory was painful. "I remember him mentioning something about the records not adding up, like a few items missing from every shipment. I thought it was just an anomaly, but he kept insisting it was deliberate. I never imagined it would lead to this." Simone's words hinted at an investigation that had grown too dangerous for a man with Lenny's reputation for precision. Next, Talia spoke with Carlos Ramirez, a longtime security guard who patrolled the warehouse. Carlos recalled that on the night before the incident, he had seen Lenny in the administrative office, huddled over a series of documents with a look of intense concentration. He was scribbling notes furiously, checking figures on his computer and comparing them to a thick stack of paper logs. Carlos said, "He muttered something about errors that were too consistent to be random, and seemed almost desperate to get to the bottom of it. I didn't think much of it then, but now it's clear he was on to something that someone didn't want known." His testimony underscored the possibility that Lenny's routine work had evolved into a dangerous quest for truth. Haunted by these recollections, Detective Monroe obtained a warrant to search Lenny Carter's modest apartment, located in a modest building in a busy part of town. The apartment was functional, one room furnished with a simple bed, a cluttered desk piled high with documents and old photographs, and a narrow window that overlooked the ceaseless activity of the street. The space carried a persistent scent of stale coffee and worn paper, a quiet testament to a life defined by careful record-keeping. In a locked drawer of an antique desk, Talia discovered Lenny's personal journal, a battered leather-bound notebook filled with meticulously written entries. The early pages were entirely routine, logs of his daily schedule, brief notes on routine shipments, and standard observations about the state of the inventory. But as the entries progressed, Lenny's tone grew increasingly anxious. In one entry, dated 3 days before his death, he wrote, "I have uncovered persistent discrepancies in the donation records. Small amounts missing from every transaction that when totaled are alarming. I fear that someone with access to these records is deliberately diverting funds for their own gain. I must tread carefully, for if I continue, I risk exposing a secret that those in power would do anything to keep hidden." The entry ended abruptly, as if his pen had been yanked away mid-sentence, leaving a silence that resonated with unspoken terror. At the same time, the cyber unit managed to recover fragments of deleted text messages from Lenny's aging cell phone, a device that bore the marks of many late nights and anxious phone calls. The recovered messages were sparse and unadorned. One simply read, "Stop now," while another warned, "Don't ask questions." Their curt, impersonal tone confirmed Talia's suspicions. Lenny had been receiving clear, urgent warnings to abandon his investigation, and those warnings had been ignored at his peril. Instead of forcing all the pieces into a neat, linear timeline, Detective Monroe allowed her investigation to expand organically, assembling a mosaic of clues from various sources. With the cooperation of the warehouse management, she turned her attention to the administrative records stored in a cramped back office, a cluttered space filled with filing cabinets, old computer terminals, and handwritten ledgers chronicling decades of transactions. Working closely with veteran records clerk Brandon Ellis, whose familiarity with the numbers was nearly encyclopedic, Talia meticulously compared the digital logs with the original paper documents. The differences were minute, a digit off in one entry, a date shifted in another, but when these minor discrepancies were aggregated over several months, they revealed a pattern that was too consistent to be coincidental. The digital records consistently indicated that every shipment was recorded as complete, while the handwritten logs documented small recurring shortfalls, tiny amounts missing from each transaction that, when added together, amounted to a significant diversion of funds. Forensic accountants were brought in to scrutinize the financial data. Their exhaustive analysis produced detailed charts and graphs that mapped the cumulative impact of the discrepancies. The figures were damning. These seemingly insignificant shortfalls, imperceptible on any given day, had over time resulted in the misappropriation of a substantial sum, a sum that had been clandestinely funneled through a labyrinth of electronic transfers to an offshore account associated with a shell corporation. Each fractional variance, each minor alteration, contributed to a broader narrative of deliberate, systematic fraud, a network of mid-level administrators who had exploited vulnerabilities in both digital and paper-based record-keeping systems for their own enrichment. As layers of evidence accumulated, Detective Monroe began receiving anonymous tips. In one instance, a plain envelope discovered tucked away in a corner of the back office contained a typed note that simply read, "Every figure holds a secret." In another, a secure email arrived from an untraceable address with a terse message, "Cease your investigation." Although these messages provided little in the way of concrete details, their tone was unambiguously menacing, a clear indication that those behind the cover-up were monitoring her every move and were prepared to take drastic measures to preserve their secret. Federal agents, alerted to the potential scope of the corruption, soon joined the investigation armed with state-of-the-art digital forensic tools. They painstakingly reconstructed a nearly complete timeline of the deleted text messages from Lenny's phone, revealing that the warnings had escalated significantly in the final days before his death. Concurrently, forensic accountants developed intricate models that demonstrated how the aggregation of minor discrepancies over time resulted in a significant diversion of funds from the warehouse's budget. The combined evidence formed an inescapable mosaic, a meticulously orchestrated cover-up that had drained resources for years, and when Lenny's inquiries threatened to expose the truth, his life was brutally ended. Detective Monroe compiled all her findings into a comprehensive report, a sprawling dossier exceeding 400 pages, interwoven with photographs of the abandoned back office, scans of pages from Lenny's journal, digital reconstructions of the deleted text messages, and detailed financial analyses that traced the misappropriated funds to their offshore destination. The report presented a coherent narrative. Subtle discrepancies in the warehouse's donation and supply records had been deliberately engineered over time to divert funds into an offshore account. When Lenny began to document these irregularities, His investigation threatened to expose a deep-rooted network of corruption, a network that, in a ruthless bid to protect its secret, ended his life. The district attorney, deeply troubled by the evidence and its implications for public trust in local institutions, convened a grand jury in a modern courthouse known for its strict adherence to accountability. Over several marathon sessions that stretched late into the night, expert witnesses testified about the digital forensic techniques that recovered the deleted text messages, and the forensic accounting that traced the diverted funds to an offshore account associated with a shell corporation. Their testimonies, delivered with precise technical language, left little room for doubt. After lengthy deliberation, the grand jury returned indictments on multiple charges, including fraud, conspiracy, and accessory to homicide, that directly linked the systematic manipulation of records to the murder of Leonard Carter. The trial itself spanned several weeks in a crowded courtroom filled with warehouse employees, local residents, legal scholars, and a steady flow of reporters. Federal prosecutors presented their case in clear, measured terms, interweaving digital reconstructions of the recovered text messages with detailed financial charts that illustrated how minor discrepancies, when aggregated, diverted a significant sum from the warehouse's funds. A digital forensics expert took the stand and painstakingly explained how each terse directive, "Stop now, don't ask questions," had been reassembled into a continuous timeline that grew increasingly urgent as the investigation advanced. Forensic accountants unveiled intricate graphs demonstrating how the accumulation of minor errors resulted in a financial gap that could only be attributed to deliberate, systematic fraud. Multiple witnesses testified about the gradual erosion of record integrity, a slow, almost imperceptible process that allowed corruption to seep into a system once trusted by the community. When Detective Monroe finally testified, her tone was calm yet resonated with personal grief. She detailed the moment she discovered Lenny's body in the silent back office, the smooth, cold surface of the floor, the faint trace of his footsteps in a thin layer of dust, and the fragile scrap of paper that remained in his grasp as his final enigmatic clue. Her narrative carefully wove together every piece of evidence, from the altered digital logs and handwritten discrepancies to the recovered journal entries and stark text messages, forming an unassailable portrait of deliberate, systematic corruption. Each observation was delivered with thoughtful precision, and the courtroom sat in reflective silence as the full extent of the betrayal was laid bare. Ultimately, the grand jury's indictments led to the conviction of several mid-level administrators and technical operatives implicated in the fraudulent scheme. They received lengthy prison sentences, and their names were recorded in public records as stark warnings against the abuse of institutional trust. Yet many in the community felt that complete accountability had not been achieved. The highest-ranking conspirators, the architects behind the diversion, managed to shield themselves through complex legal defenses, and their identities remained largely concealed in the final verdicts. That lingering uncertainty served as a sobering reminder that even when corruption is exposed, some secrets endure in the hidden corridors of power. In the months following the trial, the management of the fitness center, where the warehouse records had once been kept as a relic of a bygone era, was forced to embrace a new era of accountability. Under the watchful eyes of independent auditors, and amid persistent public scrutiny, new procedures were implemented, requiring real-time logging of every donation, supply order, and cash transaction, all reinforced with robust encryption measures and subject to regular public audits. Although these reforms could never restore the life lost, they stood as a testament to the renewed commitment to transparency, a promise that no hidden discrepancy would again erode public trust. Local media outlets, driven by a passion for investigative reporting, produced a series of in-depth documentaries and articles that chronicled every facet of the case, from the unexpected discovery in the back office to the painstaking digital reconstructions that unmasked a covert network of corruption. Community forums and town hall meetings sprang up in local centers, where residents, academics, and industry leaders engaged in animated discussions about ethical data management and the need to safeguard public trust. The story of Leonard Carter, a dedicated manager whose quest for the truth cost him his life, became a rallying cry for accountability, igniting a renewed vigilance among community members to examine every record and expose every hidden inconsistency. For Detective Monroe, Every subsequent investigation was approached with the hard-won lessons from this case etched deeply in her memory. In the quiet hours before the center reopened each day, in her modest workspace lit by a single desk lamp and accompanied by the soft hum of her computer, she frequently reread the pages of Leonard's journal and scrutinized the reconstructed text messages with unwavering focus. Each minute detail, a marginal difference in a ledger entry, a curt command from a deleted message, reminded her that only persistent inquiry can unravel even the most intricate networks of deceit. As the fitness center resumed its daily operations, members returning to their routines, trainers leading invigorating classes, and the steady pulse of healthy activity filling the space, the legacy of the investigation transformed not only the facility's internal processes, but also the community's broader commitment to transparency and integrity. The reformed digital systems, once vulnerable to subtle manipulation, now stood as benchmarks of accountability, routinely audited by independent experts and available for public review. Ongoing dialogues about ethical data management and the preservation of institutional trust became regular topics at local business forums and academic seminars, ensuring that the hard lessons learned from Leonard Carter's tragic fate would continue to inspire vigilance for years to come. This case, pieced together from digital fragments, detailed financial analyses, and the tireless determination of an investigator who refused to overlook even the smallest clue, transcended the narrative of a single murder. It unveiled a labyrinth of modern corruption, a tapestry woven from deliberate omissions and hidden discrepancies that revealed how even the most venerable institutions could be undermined from within. The reforms that followed, the increased scrutiny among staff, and the community's collective resolve to question every detail became a lasting reminder that truth often lies in the nuances of every record. And as the automatic doors of the fitness center swung open each day, welcoming a new wave of hopeful members, the memory of Leonard Carter endured, a quiet yet persistent call to examine every irregularity and uphold the principles of accountability as the foundation of a just society.